All right, well, welcome. Hopefully you're enjoying the PDC so far. There's a lot of fun stuff going on. I'm John Shuchak. I'm a technical fellow here at Microsoft. And
So wait, just before you get started, wait. A technical fellow. Can you guys hear me? Can you guys hear me? Now you can hear me. So technical fellow, John?
that means I'm an old guy who's shown a lot of new stuff at PDCs. So
I see. Okay, old guy, a lot of new stuff at PDC.
we're going to show some new stuff today, and it's a project that Dennis and I worked on. Do you want to describe what we
Sure,
did?
yep. My name's Dennis Pilarinos. I'm the Group Program Manager for .NET Services, which you got a chance to see today. John, myself, and a guy sitting right there, David Wartendijk, actually started this team. We founded this team about 2.5 years ago.
Yeah, that's the .NET Services team. And the .NET Services team is part of this broader platform, which we're going to talk about today. So we kind of have two goals this afternoon. One is to give everybody an overview of this Azure services platform and talk about the various pieces that are in there. But we also have another exciting job.
Yeah, we kind of have to do a sales job. So this is an overview talk. We're going to tell you about the different technologies, and then we're going to direct you to where you can go learn more about them. And because we're kind of a little bit on the fly here, the third goal is to get that demo box working.
Yeah, that's right. So the display driver on that box, while we're working in real time, Clemens is going to see if we can get that to happen.
Exactly.
Okay, so the Azure platform has a lot of different pieces, and this morning you saw the Windows Azure layer, which is the bottommost layer with the compute, storage, management capabilities, and then we have a lot of additional services built above those things. We're going to focus on the .NET services, the SQL services, and the live services as part of this session. And what we're going to do is we're going to go into each of these pieces, and we're going to look at some of the technologies that are in there, and we're going to talk about how they can address certain kinds of business and technical problems that developers might face in the process of building a solution. So what we'll do is we'll take an app, and then we'll take that application and we'll replace pieces of it, and we'll use those services and talk about the kinds of benefits that we get from it. So before we get started, I just want to step back just for a second, take a look at a couple quick slides that talk about the approach that we've taken overall. So I don't think you'd find it very surprising that Microsoft is in the platform business, particularly for cloud. And our goal was to build a great platform that developers could use to build solutions. And there's a number of characteristics that a platform has to have. It has to be scalable. It has to be highly available. It has to have the right kinds of SLAs. And the interesting thing is we're using this platform internally to build our applications. So we build on the Windows Azure layer, and then the services themselves integrate with each other. So for example, the access control service makes use of the SQL data services. The SQL data services can use the access control service to gate access to those things. And so we're building on each other, and we're building these integrated set of capabilities that make up this platform. Another thing about this platform is that it really represents a fundamental change from the node-oriented servers that we've traditionally built to this distributed fabric of capabilities. So if you think about what we're doing with the database, we don't just take a SQL server and put it up in the cloud, because that would require that people, in a sense, be the database administrator. They'd have to think about failover. They'd have to think about how they get that thing to scale and do the message routing. We take care of that for you, and we make sure that that thing's going to be available in the large. So we're trying to build this platform. We're in the early days of it. This is really the first chance that people are going to have to see this platform in action. And over the course of the next many months, and we're going to be iterating the software and bringing it out. Now, there's two other points that I want to make that might be a little bit more surprising. The second point is that we based it on internet standards, and we're being as open as we can be about this technology. There are Java SDKs, there's Perl SDKs, Python. We ship these things in the box, and what many people find even more surprising is that we're actually engaged with open community projects where Microsoft employees are contributing to these open source projects to get these things to be able to interact with the services in the cloud. So we're taking an approach that many people find a little bit surprising for Microsoft. Third point, and I'll come back to that standards point in just a second. The third point is that there's been a theory that as we move to these highly distributed cloud platforms, that it's a brand new world, that you have to completely rewrite your applications. And one of the things that we found is that it's possible to take your existing skills, code, knowledge about .NET and other things and bring that into the cloud. So it's not going to be like falling off a cliff. We're going to help you bring those things forward into this new world. So let's just take a look at those last 2 points for just a second. Now, when Dennis and I first talked about doing this, I suggested that, well, why don't we do the whole thing in Perl, Python, Ruby, and that kind of stuff? And
yeah, not so much. I figured PDC audience, familiar with C#, familiar with VB, we're going to do it in C# and VB. My skills in those other languages, not so hot these days.
So just because we're going to be focused on .NET doesn't mean, though, that all of these other platforms aren't going to have fantastic support and all those libraries are available. In fact, people from my team were here and they're like, make sure in the call to action you tell them you can use the Java SDK and everything.
So I think basically what you're saying is if you're building a viable cloud platform, you need more than 1 or 2 languages.
Not only 1 or 2 languages, you need to make it open to all of the different tool environments and everything else.
Great, yep.
Okay, so the other key point is that the .NET framework has been evolving. When we started with the .NET framework, it was largely focused on building client-oriented applications. Some client-server, and then over time, we've been extending that. The first place that we found that we could really move the .NET framework was into technologies like the web with ASP.NET, and that's been a very successful platform. Similarly, .NET has become a fantastic environment for building server applications. And with the introduction of Silverlight and the related technologies, people are using it to build rich internet applications. This PDC is about where we're taking those technologies and now we're bringing .NET, we're extending it and stretching it to the cloud. So the ideas, the technologies that you're familiar with, they're going to be applicable in this new environment. Not everything transfers. Just like when we took ASP.NET, we invented some new application models. The same is going to hold here. There's going to be some new application models, new tools, new capabilities that you'll get as you move into this environment. So with that, let's move on to look at some code and start talking about some examples.
Sounds good.
Yep. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at a company called Litware. Litware is based on a real company that does quizzes. The idea is pretty simple. There's an ASP.NET app that's hosted up at a place like Rackspace, and what they do is they present videos and questions. Customers come, they answer the questions based on the videos, and then Litware scores those results. Pretty straightforward ASP.NET kind of application, and they've got a lot of different kinds of customers that use this. So you've probably heard of AdventureWorks and Contoso and Fabricam. They're all customers of Litware.
They seem to be customers of a lot of things at PDC.
Oh yeah, they always are.
Yeah.
Now AdventureWorks, what they do is they use it to do vacation videos. Contoso's a large pharmaceutical company, and they have things like SAP and Exchange and all that kind of stuff back there. They're going to use it for compliance training. You know those HR tests that a lot of companies have? They present you with a complicated situation.
Yeah, we have those at Microsoft. John is kind of ripping into me because I don't generally do them, and when I do, I don't do so well at them. Yeah. So HR compliance tests, not so much for me.
Not for you, okay. And then Fabricam, a small manufacturer, and they are using Small Business Server, and they need an easy solution to integrate with these things. They use Litware to do things like company meeting, where should we have the company meeting, something like that. So that's the idea. Litware is this app. We're going to go modify Litware to do a lot of different things, and we're going to use the services to go do that. So we'll start by talking about some of the challenges that Litware faces with this pretty straightforward app and see how the services can help them. So the first place that we're going to look is in the identity and access control area. If you think about some of the challenges that Litware faces, they have a lot of different identities that customers have already, and yet the way most web apps work, you have to go and register, sign up for a username and password. And what Litware found out is that when they did that, they lost a lot of customers. People would forget their usernames and passwords, and it's a little bit of a sad situation because most of the people coming already have an identity. I think you were talking to the guys
Sean
from
Davison,
at Red Prairie?
at Red Prairie. So he was actually in the keynote today. We were actually in this very room and we're doing preparations. As you can imagine, standing in front of 6,000 people can be a little intimidating. And we started talking a little bit about the technology, and one of the things that we're talking about is in his apps, he wants people who use his apps to be able to take the identities that they already have and project them into that app. He doesn't want to have to model that identity once again into his application. So he found it actually quite compelling, some of the stuff that we're building on.
Right. So what we're going to do is we're going to show how a developer at Litware, in this case Lane, you're going to play Lane.
I'll play Lane and a couple other people.
Okay. So Lane is going to use some services that we provide to enable lots of different users to come into Litware. So Sandy, who's got a Windows Live ID, will be able to log in. Corey at Contoso will be able to use the next generation of Active Directory Federation services to log in with their AD identity. And then the folks at Fabricam with their small business servers will be able to go in through the new Microsoft Services connector that we saw this morning. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to take advantage of the access control service to enable this. And as you're going to see, it's quite easy and quite simple to put this together. So why don't we start by showing what the experience is for the application as these various users log in.
Sounds good. So the first thing we're actually going to take a look at is AdventureWorks. AdventureWorks is that company who actually offers vacation quizzes, basically. So AdventureWorks customers are potentially use Windows Live IDs. So I'm going to play the role of Sandy, and she's a potential AdventureWorks customer. She's going to log in, and she's prompted now for her Windows Live ID. So Sandy at livemail.com, super secret password, which might or might not be password, and we'll see our first quiz.
And this should have some audio.
Oh, this is my favorite clip, too.
Are you a Shoes Circus Clown Club member? Platinum.
So maybe she'll run into Bill and Jerry. So does she do a lot of shopping on her vacation?
I think she does.
She probably does.
Oh, we can turn down the audio. We got a little buzz.
Great, and she maybe likes to speak French.
French on her vacations, but you get the idea. She goes through, sees these videos, answers a couple questions, and now we're done with that particular quiz.
Pretty standard experience, right? She logged in with her Windows Live ID and got to take that survey.
Yeah. Now, you've probably seen things like this already, which is where we're using Windows Live ID. When we move to the next part of the demo, this is where things get a little more interesting, which is now let's have this same app, same exact app, now work with corporate identities. In this case, let's sign in and take one of those compliance training quizzes. And in this case, we'll do Contoso. So
Great.
Contoso.
So Contoso, again, is this pharmaceutical company. Its customers, in this case, are actually the employees of the company. The employees have to do this HR training. Now, the identity that Contoso wants to be able to offer these surveys or these quizzes to are the employees, right? So they want to use the identity of that employee. So a very similar experience, except that when we go to log in this case, instead of being prompted for Windows Live ID, you can see that they're actually been redirected now to contoso.com. So this is a server that's effectively fronting the Active Directory that sits at Contoso. So now Corey doesn't log in with the Windows Live ID. He or she, did we decide yet? They happen to be actually logging in with the corporate identity that they have at Contoso, and they can use that identity, and Litware's app continues to work as expected.
Okay. All right. So now we've seen how you doing on these quizzes. This is not his strong suit, or these HR quizzes.
I'm lucky that I'm even doing them.
Okay. So now we've seen two examples. The Litware app has worked with some corporate identities. It's worked with some live identities. Let's see another example that we saw this morning, which is setting up a corporate federation. That can be a pretty big project. And so at the PDC, we're announcing the Microsoft Services Connector, and that enables organizations with a very small number of clicks to use the identity services, in particular the federation service that Microsoft offers, to federate their identities with the cloud so that people can log in very easily. So 4 clicks after they've set that thing up, let's go look at how Fabricam could go log into that same example. Now, this is the weird thing about identity examples. You know, basically, they're not that exciting in the sense that when everything's good, they just kind of work. What we're going to see as we go behind the scenes, how this all happens. So what's happened here is that Frances is logging in. She's from Fabricam. Because she uses the Microsoft Services connector, we're detecting that. Now we're going to redirect to the Microsoft Services connector. We'll enter the Fabricam corporate identities, and we're logged in. So we've done a lot of different kinds of identities. We've supported internet identities, different kinds of corporate identities. And one of the things that we found is that that is typically a lot of work for people to get working inside their applications. So what I'd like to do now is look behind the scenes at the code and show you how easy we've made it for people to integrate with all these different kinds of identities. So let's take a look at the code that Lane did. What Lane did was he installed the latest version of the .NET framework for identity, the Geneva frameworks. And as you can see, as part of that, it's updated the web.config to support something called identity models. And why don't you describe a little bit about what's going on in here?
Sure. So as part of using the new kind of Geneva programming model, what you're seeing here is that Lane's application, the Litware application, trusts an access control service that exists out in the cloud, and that happens to be at accesscontrol.windows.net.
Yeah, why don't you highlight that?
Sure. So here's basically where the app delegates its authorization and authentication requirements out to this cloud service.
So instead of the app having to do all of this processing itself, it's saying, I'll trust this Litware access control service, and if that access control service says it's okay to go look inside at these various pages, we're going to be good to go.
Great. So let's take a look at the code for now.
Let's take a look at the code. Yep.
So here's, if you're an ASP.NET developer, you're probably familiar with the page load method. You'll see what we're doing here is we're actually just taking a claims identity, and we're making some assertions about that. We're going to enumerate them, and if that claim contains the value equals allowed, then we're going to redirect that person to go ahead and take the training. Okay. So one of the users goes to the access control service, authenticates themselves, comes to the app now with this claim. Here's all the code that you need to write in order for that claim to be validated.
Great. So anything else we want to show here?
I don't think so.
Okay. So let's just go back to the slides here just for a second. And as we can see, we've got many different kinds of identity coming in. The access control service is managing that. And we saw the app running. So what I'd like to do now is take a quick look inside the access control service, and let's take a look at the rules that the access control service is using to control access to this application. And that'll demonstrate some of the very interesting capabilities that are in the access control service.
Great. So we're going to launch a browser here really quickly. And we're going to log into the portal that allows Lane at Litware to actually manage his services. So in this portal, we're taking a look at the access control rules that Lane has set up for the Litware app. And in this case, we're actually looking at the Contoso rules.
So these are the rules that Lane has set up in the access control service to decide what parts of the Litware app they can use. And as you can see, what they've done is they've said that if they're domain users, then they have access to the Contoso training. And this is a very flexible system. For example, if you go to the drop-down, we could create roles. So we could create a complete role-based access control service. We've actually have the ability to factor out a lot of the complex logic that would normally be inside of an application and provide a declarative way to put this all together. So this hopefully gives you a little bit of a taste of the kinds of capabilities that the access control service provides. Okay. So as we talked about, Litware today uses username and password. Their end users want a single sign-on approach. They have their own identities. They'd like to bring that to the app. That's normally a lot of work for people. Now, with a couple small changes to the application, the access control service can cover those things for them. We showed AdventureWorks using live IDs, Contoso using AD Federation, and Fabricam as a small business. But this works with a lot of other systems. So for example, at the recent Burton conference, we showed our technologies working together with Oracle and Sun and Tivoli, so that if you've built your application in one easy step, you're able to work with a lot of different partners. Now, to learn more about this is the sales part of the thing. There was a great talk that occurred this morning that Kim Cameron gave on BB11. If you have a chance to take a look at that after the fact, that's a good one to go to.
I love hearing that. There was a great talk this morning that you've probably missed.
No, but they can view these things online.
Yeah, I know. It's great.
We're going to drill into these things in a lot more detail in BB55, where we'll describe the access control service. And then there's various other drill downs, 22, 28, and so on, that let you see how all of these things fit together, and you can go take a look at those.
Yeah, I think Justin's actually in the audience. He's one of the speakers.
There he is.
Great presenter. Highly recommend that you go check it out.
Okay, so that gives us a first quick example of one of the services. Now we've got something a little bit fun to do, which is we're going to give you a quick preview of something that's going to be announced tomorrow.
So we can't do too much, though.
Can't do too much. And that's the new mesh technologies. So we've got Litware. It's up and running. And one of the challenges that Litware faces is that often there's a lot of information that they would like to get during the registration part. So when Sandy comes in here, they ask Sandy about her name, city, contact information, and the like. And what we're going to do is we're going to use Windows Live ID and the mesh to simplify that process. And it's a little bit deceiving how simple this is to start with, and then we'll kind of drill into a little bit and describe why these mesh technologies are going to be so important. So how about we do the quick demo showing what's going to happen here?
Sure. So I'm in the process, because this quote hasn't been officially released yet, I'm in the process of creating one of these mesh apps, or this mesh, using some of the mesh service. So right here, what I actually have is a very simple form that's going to get data based on a Windows Live ID that might actually try to access my service. So I'm going to go and say, use my Windows Live ID profile.
Yeah, so we put a button on the page. That button redirected us over to the Windows Live ID service where we asked for information about that user.
So that,
now, that's an interesting thing because users just don't want to give that information away to anyone. So what do we see here?
Yeah, so the Litware application is asking for privileged data, if you will, about the Windows Live ID that's using Litware. Now, we want to make sure that people are in control of their data and their identity. So here we have a screen that says that enables the user to say, yes, I'm going to allow the Litware application to have access to my data.
So why don't you make it for a week?
Sure, and I get to specify how long I want to have access for. So is it a day, a week, a month, a year? We'll try a week.
Okay.
And I say, go ahead, Litware. You can have access to this data. And here are the credentials that here's Sandy's account. And some data about Sandy that she released to Litware.
Yeah.
Now,
big deal or not?
Well, you know, from the outside looking in, this is glorified RoboCopy, right?
Well, RoboForm is a program that a lot of people use to go fill in forms. But I use that as an example because there's kind of two really fundamental differences about what we're seeing here. The first fundamental difference is this works from anywhere. You could be on any machine. You could be at an airport. That data is stored out in the cloud, and now when we go to fill that thing in, it's going to be available to us. But it's not just filling in the form. When we went to that dialog and we said, I consent to let Litware take a look at this data, we're actually establishing a producer-consumer relationship between these things. That 1 week allow meant that if I were to go update my profile information, I don't have to go back to all of those web apps where I filled in all of those forms. That's live data. That data has a publish and subscribe relationship with it. It remains in sync. As I edit in one place, it traverses and goes to the other places. And it's not just limited to the simple kind of data that we see here. We could, for example, we could be taking data from our training app. We could be placing videos into the customer's local storage. So the mesh gives us information about their devices, their instant messenger alerts, their relationships to other people. We can see their friends.
Be careful, because you might be jumping the shark.
Oh yeah, okay, great.
So there's a lot of stuff that we're going to be talking about tomorrow.
And
John likes to get carried away and talk about the technology. Take it back a little.
All right, there we go. So let's just kind of quickly summarize that. There's a lot of options. I think it's one of the coolest things that we're announcing here at the PDC. Tomorrow, during the keynote, they'll be describing the mesh in a lot more detail. This is just a quick little glimpse of it. And then there's 2 sessions that go into it in a lot more detail, and you can see how the programming model works and how easy it is to put all this stuff together. Okay, we ready to move on?
Yeah, I think so. So we've done the identity and access control. We've done the mesh. Now we're going to talk about the service bus.
Yeah, so what we've kind of looked at so far are kind of the consumer or outbound user-facing kind of capabilities. Let's switch gears now and look at some of the more back-end oriented technologies that the Microsoft Azure platform provides for building applications. Now, many of you have probably worked in corporate environments where you've done application integration. And a great way to do application integration is around a set of technologies sometimes known as an enterprise service bus. Enterprise service buses allow us to create loosely coupled applications. They have a registry. They facilitate messaging between different parts of the application, and many people use those to build apps. One of the biggest challenges that people who are building cloud-based applications face is that when they build the application out in the cloud, it's sometimes very difficult to talk to existing corporate resources. For example, if I'm using a cloud-based CRM system and I get a new contact, I might have a fulfillment system that's running inside my company. How do I get the message notifications and integrate it into my back-end systems?
Do you guys find that as a fairly common problem? Is this something that you've seen? Yeah, I'm seeing a bunch of heads nod.
Yeah. Now, that's a tricky problem when you decide that you want to do this across organizations, because it needs to be secure, it needs to conform to all the right kinds of IT policies, and it's often quite a big onerous chore to get the firewalls configured and the right security checks in and all that kind of stuff in place. What we're doing is we're providing a service bus that has those technologies built into it, and it makes it super easy to do. Mm-hmm. So the specific challenge that Litware faces is after they've finished quizzes, they often want to notify people, and in this case, after Dennis takes his HR training, we want to record that into the SAP system.
I'm not going to do it.
And that way, that nice report that comes out, we can see whether Dennis completed his training or not, and I get to, as his manager, go nag him. So let's see what it's going to take to go put that together.
Sure.
So why don't we start by looking at what what Lane at Litware needs to do to start firing a message out onto that service bus.
Great. So at the end of one of the surveys, one of the things that the Litware app is going to do is raise an event to a location out on the internet. Very simple concept. Who's listening at that is really at the discretion of the person who's listening, and Lane can actually ACL it down to say, I only want these people, but they don't necessarily have to be there at the time.
Yeah, so notice in the code.
Yeah, so the code's pretty straightforward. The very common pattern, the first thing you need to do is get the credentials for how you can actually access that service. So in this case, we made it explicitly obvious. This is Litware, and there's that super secret password. And the next thing that we're going to do is actually define the service address that this event is going to be raised at. So you can take a look. I'm passing a couple of parameters. Effectively, this is just a URI. This is HTTP servicebus.windows.net/services, and in this case, record the score. So beyond that, all I'm going to do is open the channel, and then I'm going to call the method to send that event off into the cloud.
Okay, so what we've done there is we've done a publish operation. Notice the person writing the Litware app has no knowledge of the other applications that might be interested in these scores completing. So what we'll want to do now is we'll want to receive those events.
Yeah.
And to do that, let's go over and look at what Corey, who's a developer at Contoso, does.
So that begs the obvious question. If an event gets raised and there's no one to listen, did it happen to begin with?
Yes, it did,
But anyway.
okay.
Okay. So a very similar pattern. Here is now Corey at Contoso. They have an SAP system that they're interested in getting these events. In this case, the event contains information about the employee and their score, and if they completed the HR training, which never happens if it's me. So here, again, a little bit more. Corey's a better developer. She's actually getting the configuration settings Sorry, he's getting the username and password out of config. There's the address that this app is going to be listening to, and it just waits to listen. Sorry, it's waiting to listen until it gets that event.
Okay.
So should we see it in action?
Sure. So just one quick comment on the code. If you've done any WCF programming, this should look super familiar. All we've done is we've taken what's already in the .NET framework. We've provided a couple of extensions to do this publish and subscribe operations and to enable cross-organizational secure messaging. Okay, so let's run this.
So here's that Corey's. This could be effectively Corey's computer. She's going to run the SAP app.
So this is listening for events on the service bus.
Right. And now if I go and complete the training one time.
So Corey's going to test it by running through this.
Corey's credentials at Contoso.
Corey's credentials at Contoso. That's good alliteration.
Yeah. So there we go. There's Jerry cutting his toenails again.
Is that okay? No, that's not okay.
I think it's fine. That's why I fail.
Yeah, you don't do well on those.
So, and there we go. So an event was raised at this location, and you can see that the training is now complete. So the app raised the event out into the cloud. The listener was subscribed to that location, got the message, and displayed training complete.
Okay, so a very simple example of using a...
Thanks.
So it's a very simple example of using a hosted enterprise service bus, what we call an internet service bus, to facilitate connecting together applications out on the internet. Now, we've got a couple of drill downs on this technology. Oops, I probably should have showed that slide before. Tomorrow, Dennis and I are going to go into this stuff in a lot more detail, and then Clemens, who's sitting down here, is going to provide a detailed talk, BB38, to go through in detail all of the capabilities of this service bus. The service bus does a lot of cool stuff. It can transform HTTP into web messages. It provides a registry. It provides advanced security option, direct connections that are high-speed traversals. So if you were doing a hosted video service, if you wanted to build an internet-scale chat, lots and lots and lots of technologies available as part of that service bus.
And it turns out Clemens is good at fixing demo machines 2 minutes before they start. So
great, yeah, okay.
If you have questions about your machine, you should also talk to Clemens.
All right. So if you've got one of these service buses running and you've got your application sending all these different kinds of events around, that's often a very good place to build your business processes. And as you noticed, both Corey and Lane had to go into their code and they had to modify some C# code in order to send the events and to receive the events. Now, we wanted a really agile development environment. Wouldn't it be great if we had a way to describe our business processes in a much more declarative, much more fluid kind of way? And the good news is at the last PDC, I think it was you who was up on stage where we introduced our workflow technologies.
Yeah, music to my ears. At last PDC, I was actually doing, I get progressively smaller rooms. That's probably saying something. But I was in the keynote hall announcing Windows Workflow Foundation 3.0. And that shipped as part of .NET Framework 3.0 and 3.5. And what we've actually done is use that experience and the kind of that idea of extending your familiarity with the framework and actually allowed you to use that programming model with a cloud service that we call the workflow service. So you want to check that out?
Sure.
All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually bring up a design of a workflow that's been built. And this workflow, if you're familiar with it, is very similar to what you see in Visual Studio today. We've actually extended it with a set of activities that are cloud specific, except that I'd need to switch the screen.
Okay.
Ah, there we go. It turns out graphical things are better when they're shown.
Yes.
So the toolbox here, you can see a set of activities that we've used to now create this workflow. And this workflow does a pretty interesting thing. So it turns out in Contoso, there's another group within the company that's interested not only if someone's done the training or not, but how they scored. So they've modeled their business logic to say, you know, get the user ID, read the score, and then let's do some conditional logic.
So if the score is below a certain level, then we're going to send an event that says they didn't do well. We'll send another event that they did well. And now there are new events being fired out across that service bus. And as you can see, it was very easy for the developers to go put these new kinds of workflows together. No code needed to be written. We simply defined the workflow. Now the question is, how are we going to go run that? Now, you've had experience running these workflows.
Yep. So
what would typically need to be done?
Yeah, so typically if you were to take this workflow and build it out in a kind of a scale-out environment, there's a bunch of things that you have to worry about. You're going to have to worry about building a host. You're going to find out where that host lives. How do you scale it out? What happens when one of the hosts dies? Long-running workflows can run for a super long time. If that instance goes away, when does it come back? How do you figure out the storage?
What happens when the database gets corrupted?
Exactly. There's tons and tons of things. As a developer now, using the workflow service, it's pretty straightforward.
Well, but I think it's worth pointing out, these are challenges that our developers have had to face since we've done the introduction of the workflow services. One exciting thing that we're announcing at the PDC is a new host that is being built to support those things in the enterprise environment. But what the cloud does is it really takes this thing to the next level in terms of ease of use. So why don't you show how easy we can do this from a tooling standpoint?
Sure. This is probably one of my favorite features. I can actually just right-click on the design surface. I can say deploy workflow, and I'm going to go off and create this workflow. I'm going to log in with my credentials, and I'm going to deploy, make sure I got the right ones. I'm going to deploy this definition out into the cloud, and I'm going to go kick it off to run.
So it's created the workflow instance?
Oh, it's about to. It's creating, and there are the instances that it created.
Okay. So think about what we just did. No machines to set up and install, no failover, no database backup systems. That workflow is out there now running. It's good to go.
It's just waiting for people to start using it.
So I think that should give you an idea of how easy that is to do. Can we see that in action?
Sure. So like I said, Contoso has another group. They're interested in being notified of events. Let's take a look at that. So here's yet another listener. So here's our original one that we saw earlier. Here's a listener now listening for those events.
So if you go take your training and you do poorly, I'll get a notification?
Yeah, that's the default. I'm going to do poorly. So Jerry's still clipping his toenails, creeping out little girls. The leather giraffe, I should only take it if it's directed so by my direct manager. In a second here, we see that that second training is complete. Depending if I got more or less, employee passed equals false.
Pretty typical. So there's an example of that workflow outrunning, raising new kinds of events, using the service bus to transmit them, using the access control service to protect it, using the access control and identity system to provide the right kinds of integration with employee identities and so on. It's really quite a compelling example of how all these things can fit together. Now, can we see the workflow portal?
Sure, absolutely. If we go take a look at the actual workflow portal itself, so I magically sent this off into the ether. Let's see what that ether happens to manifest itself as.
So we're going to log in as Lane, and we're going to take a look at the
workflow types. Actually, let's just show you the running instances. So I think we're going to run a little bit on time. Here is the running workflow right now. If I take a look at it, I can see a couple of details. I can see that it's running. It's running as litware. Here's when it was created, and here's the last time it was modified. So there you go. So when I publish it out into the ether, it went into this cloud workflow service, and here's the portal that I can actually use to go and manage those instances.
So no code to write, draw your picture of your workflow, deploy and run. So we're about 10 after. So we've got a pretty compelling app now. We've taken the litware app, we've integrated with corporate and internet identities. We've done access control to decide what parts are appropriate. We've used the mesh to manage profile information and potentially do other cool things like take parts of the app offline. We've used the service bus to integrate to back-end systems. We've used the workflow to invent new business processes and keep those things running. Well, all of this stuff, interestingly enough, is typically built on an underlying layer, and litware has a real challenge associated with managing all the data that they've now been building. Oh, I should just say this before we go on. If you want to learn more about the workflow services, Mustafa, who's sitting down here, has a great talk, BB27. He'll be describing the workflow services in a lot more detail.
So you're a much better software engineer than sales guy.
I know, I forget the sales part every time. All right, so the SQL data services. Now, as we've talked about, litware has a lot of data. they're taking these results from the scores. They've got lots of different customers, and they've got their customers who want to be able to look at that data. They don't want to have to worry about keeping all of this relational data safe and secure. I mean, think about it. If you're running your own data stores, you've got to have a DBA that's worried about making sure the data's up and running all the time. You've got to make sure you can scale it out. There's a lot of challenges that you're going to face with the data. By using SQL Data Services, you're able to get many of those capabilities without having the overhead of doing that management, and you get all the advantage of this stuff running. So as Litware puts their data out there, they also get a number of other advantages. For example, they can share that data with partners. And we'll see some examples in just a moment of how we can even let end users take a look at the data that we're creating. So what I'd like to do is zoom in into the Litware app and look at where they're going to start writing out the data that's a result of the scores and see how that works.
Sounds good. So we did two things at the end of the completion. We raised an event. Let's just close this really quick. So we saw us sending a completion event here. And now what we're going to do is actually record the score. So unfortunately, people like to keep track of these things, in my case. And very similar pattern. What we're going to do is, set up a set of credentials, who's basically the application's credentials. And then we describe our data model. In this case, we happen to be using authorities, containers, and entities, which is the standard SQL Data Services data model. And we are going to just very simply create a record in this database that exists out in the cloud. So
Okay.
Normally, I would have to do a lot more stuff, right? Like, where is that, in this case, potentially could be a SQL server live out in the cloud. So that's a pretty hard thing to do.
Yeah, and if you think about some of this, let's say that this application started to get a lot of use and scale. Suppose that you wanted to have this data available around the world. Many of those kind of challenges are addressed very easily through the service. So
Yep.
high scale, high availability, geo availability, all without the need to have DBAs spending a lot of time managing and keeping this data up to date. Now, Clemens was trying to work his magic. Can we actually term serve over to that machine?
Yeah, let's see. So the video drivers were a little bit wonky. I think we can actually take a look at the results. So, in the process of testing a demo, you run through it a bunch of times, and we're actually going to show you now, as that application was recording the score, you can use a web browser to hit the container, and here's the raw XML that describes the results. You can see David Warwick-Contoso got a score of 73, and he was running version 6051 or what have you.
So this is pretty interesting. If you're a REST developer, you're in Perl, Python, here's a great way that you can just do a standard HTTP request and get back the data for your application. And as you can see, the various different users of the tests are available there, and we can also see the values that are in there. Now, that's a great way for developers to get access to the data, but what about end users? Let's say that Contoso wanted to let people do analytics or reporting on this data. Well, one of the tools that people find most useful for looking at data, doing things like pivot tables, sorting, filtering, is Excel. And so can we actually use Excel to look at this data too?
Yeah, so our archetype knowledge worker can actually go and suck that data in. Here's a control that we're working on right now, which allows you to actually download from SQL Data Services, and you get a different way of visualizing it. There we go. Here's the results container that I was interested in, and we can go ahead and suck all that data in. So here's another tool that you can use with this cloud service.
Okay, so that kind of completes a pretty interesting...
Great, yeah.
So to learn more about the SQL Data Services tomorrow, BB23, David Campbell is going to be going into those things and talking about this in a great deal of detail. And then we'll be talking about some of the futures in BB14. So what's next? We've tried to give you just a taste of what these various kinds of services can do. They're very powerful. They take a lot of the grunt work that people have had to do to build high-scale, high-availability services, and it makes it available in a nice, easy-to-use package, and it's available for you to go try. If you go up to http://www.azure.com, you can sign up now. But if you want to really get easy access to it, you can go over to the hands-on labs and you can go start playing with these services immediately. There's a whole bunch of breakout sessions for you to do where we go into these things in a lot more detail. And so while we're doing questions, what I'll do is I'll pop up a list of the various breakouts that you can go and attend, and we'll start by taking questions. I'd ask that as people ask questions, there are various mics placed around the room, and Dennis and I will be available to take those as people ask. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Okay.
All right, first question.
Is it hot? So
Yep.
you have infinite CPU, infinite storage. How do you do parallelization, like with Dryad or Hadoop?
Can you talk a little bit closer to the mic?
Actually,
I
if you
can.
want, should we have
No,
people? No, you want it there?
Use the
Okay.
mics.
From here? Okay, so Dryad or Hadoop, how can we take advantage of the amount of storage and the amount of processing power that we'll have to parallelize like workflow or things like that?
So the question is, how can we take advantage of the parallelism in the Windows Azure platform to handle things like workflow? Well, this is the really interesting thing about the workflow service. That workflow service, we've already done that for you. So as you go and run that workflow, we're doing all the work necessary to have that workflow run across tens, thousands of machines and ensure high availability. As messages are coming in, we can auto-scale that thing out. So we think of the workflow not so much as a workflow server hosted up in the sky, but really a workflow fabric that enables a lot of different kinds of workflows all to run in parallel and simultaneously.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
Okay. Next question?
Yep, I guess in the center again. Oh, sorry, we'll get to you in a second. Oh, is that not working? Okay, if we can have one of the techs, maybe take a look at that
Yeah,
one.
that one's not working. We have a question over here.
I think there's one in the middle. Why don't we get to the guy in the middle and then,
Okay.
yeah?
Yeah. In the data services, is there support for transactions and relational data?
So the question is there support for transactions today and for relational data? So there is the ability to do joins. And in terms of transactions, there are transactional semantics associated with the creation of entities and so on. Over time, we'll be adding more and more of what we think of as the traditional relational semantics. But transactions are a good example of, as you move into a cloud-oriented world, sometimes the way you want to handle transactions looks a little bit different. For example, doing transactions across organizational boundaries where you don't have the ability to do the rollback and understand if there's a deadlock, we often see people move to a more compensating oriented model. So as we move into the cloud, we think that there will be some changes. We're going to be providing richer and richer capabilities. And if you go to the talk on, I think it was the previous slide.
Dave Campbell's talk for
Dave
future.
Campbell's talk,
Go, whoa.
right there, BB23, he'll be covering, BB14, he'll be talking a lot about where we're headed with that.
Okay, right.
Great, the gentleman over there, yep.
I'm from Brazil.
Okay.
A big part of development community will not see with good eyes have their data inside Microsoft servers. Some people are already calling this as Skynet in Twitter. They already call this. So what will be the future of Windows Azure? It will be possible for other companies to host these services at the same way Microsoft will host at the preview, and how will you do the marketing of this to change this way of see the Azure?
Okay, so I think the question, just to summarize it, is we're building these very sophisticated services out in the cloud. And so the Azure Services Platform has scale-out workflow and scale-out data. Will other people be able to run those same kind of services over time? And the short answer is, we're taking those technologies and we're bringing them back into our server products. So take workflow as a concrete example. As we think about how to take and run workflow at high scale and high availability, the same underlying mechanisms that we're building, we're putting into our application server that then you can deploy inside your company, or people can deploy in data centers and offer the same kind of services. So there'll be this positive feedback cycle between the software, the servers, and the services. It's not going to happen immediately, but that's something that will be happening over the course of the next couple of years as we roll out more and more of these technologies into our servers.
Can you say something about the roadmap of this server technology? Because Azure will be at marketing at 2009, and the server technology that make Azure works, so we will start after that.
I'm not sure I understand the question. Maybe we can talk after the talk?
Okay.
Okay.
Perfect. Go ahead.
Yep.
With the publish and subscribe model, one of the problems we have is security. I mean, if you publish some event, I mean, can anybody just subscribe, or does that security model come back onto that? And does the developer have control to restrict who can subscribe to the things
Not
he
only
publishes?
who can subscribe, who can publish to the event, who can subscribe to it. So that same access control service that we saw can be used to protect the various different kinds of operations in the pub subsystem. So concretely, you could define a role called event publisher. You could put AD groups in there. You could put people from various teams on that. So you have a lot of control over who can publish, who can subscribe, and even who has visibility into the events.
When you create a .NET Services account, in fact, what happens is a couple of these rules are provisioned for you. So your application automatically has the right to send and listen to that endpoint in the cloud. You can then extend those rules to say, I also want whoever to be able to send or listen, and it might be a specific person, or it could be a group of people. So it's actually composing both the access control service and the service bus service together to enable that security.
And that's not just at the endpoint level, but at the actual message level?
So you can layer that on top as well.
Okay.
So like you can, we can talk about how you could factor your app, but there's a couple of ways that you could definitely do that.
Yep.
That's right down the middle of our scenario.
Does that answer your question?
Yep.
Great.
Great.
Over there?
Going into the parallelization of things with this, how does that work across, say, the web farms and stuff? Is there any kind of built-in process to spread that across various servers? Let's say I fire off 50 threads to go do something.
Are you talking about at the Windows Azure layer?
Yes.
So I'm not the best guy to talk to that. If you can find Steve or Manavir, that's the one layer down. Dennis and I work at the layer up where we're focused on things like the workflow, the access control service, the data layers, and so on.
Okay.
So the short answer, so with that caveat in mind, the plan is to provide you with very rich sets of capabilities to control how many machines are running this thing, how many threads get forked off, and over time we'll be increasing the level of richness in the programming model. So for example, native code is coming and you'll have more control down a layer as those things become available.
Okay.
Okay? And then over there?
Do the data services provide agile refactoring capability, such as, with preservation of data, such as an alter table or alter column capability?
They don't have that. It's a new data model. It's an entity-based data model today with authorities, containers, and entities. So some of the techniques that are available in SQL today don't make as much sense in this new distributed fabric world. I'd recommend that you spend some time talking to David Campbell as part of that BB23 talk, I think it is, 14, where he can go into that in a lot more detail. But again, the semantics of the SQL data services are new. More and more of the SQL semantics will become available. So talk to him to get a feel for when what you're looking for will be online.
Thank you.
Okay? Over there?
Hi, I have customers who have legal requirements that their data not be stored in certain jurisdictions.
Yes.
Does the storage service and SQL data service have ways to express that?
That's, yeah, one of the interesting things we were just talking about was this notion of an authority, a container, and then an entity. Part of the design of the Azure platform all up was specifically to address many of the legal and safe harbor requirements. So in particular, in the data services layer, there's, at the authority level, we have the ability to pin, for example, authorities to particular locales. And we don't have all of those capabilities exposed in this CTP, but that kind of capability will be coming. And just to kind of reinforce the point, we have those same requirements on our internal services that we're building on top of these things that we then sell. So when we do hosted exchange, it's very important in mail systems that, for example, in pharmaceutical companies, they have very onerous requirements on where the mail can be stored and so on. So we see those internal requirements for us. We think that's actually one of the big differentiators for the Microsoft platform, which is we focus a lot on the kind of requirements that businesses have. And that's a big one.
Thank you.
Okay.
Is it possible to host my application on the Azure which do some job on scheduled basis? For example, field data to SQL services.
Yes, so I think the question is, can you schedule recurring tasks effectively in the cloud, right? So one of the, actually if you come to the session that we're giving tomorrow, that's one of the things that we're actually going to show you in the workflow session is how you can effectively write a cron job, if you will, in the cloud. If you get the .NET Services SDK, the getting started sample is all about pinging a site every 2 minutes to figure out if it's up or not. So that's something that we definitely think about. Yep, Stussy.
Hi, quick question. You said your pub sub actually works over HTTP, which means it can go over, through firewalls and other things. Now, what if I have, say, a large number of subscribers? An example would be a stock price changing, and I need to notify.
Yep. So
how do you deal with that?
So the service bus isn't limited to just HTTP. In fact, one of the things Clemens will describe is the very rich set of bindings that are available to applications that are using the service bus. A concrete example of one of those bindings is what we call a direct mode. In the direct mode, we'll use the service bus to help two endpoints establish, for example, a direct TCP connection where both applications could be residing behind a NAT or a firewall, and they can have very high performance communication between them. So for things like stock notifications or instant messaging, there's a lot of the capabilities that you're probably looking for as part of that. Again, it's a super rich, very extensible environment, and I strongly encourage you to take a look at Clemens' talk where he'll go through all the details about how that stuff works.
It's actually kind of funny that you bring that up because, as part of starting a project at Microsoft, one of the things you have to do is show it to various executives, and at the time we showed it to Bill and Ray. And the app that we actually showed was what you're talking about, which is a stock trading app.
Oh, okay.
So instead of the app polling for that data, as the data changes, an event is raised on the bus, and the app is aware of it.
And it directly pushed it to the app.
Did it pass the scalability test? Or?
We're here now, right?
Yeah, we're here.
There you go.
Okay, thank you.
Should we just keep going? Let's just
keep going
round robin.
Yeah, my question is, does the service bus have guaranteed delivery so if the subscriber goes down, they don't lose any messages?
So in the release that we're doing here at the PDC, this community technology preview, we do not have reliable messaging as cloud-based reliable messaging in the following sense. We don't do store and forward through the cloud. What we think about the current model is connected pub sub. So if the various parties are connected, we'll get that message delivered with high likelihood. Over time, we plan to enhance that with additional mechanisms, just like you can in WCF, so that we can do reliable messaging on top of that. And then eventually provide this store and forward capability so that even if some of the partners are offline, when they reconnect, it can queue back up. We have some simple mechanisms that are in place even in the CTP that enable that kind of semantic in a limited way over HTTP. Again, Clemens will be talking about that and where we're going with the service bus. But let me just put it this way. I think the single biggest request we get from developers is what you just asked for.
Yep, thank you.
So,
go ahead.
Hi, I'm thinking about a slide that had a lot of technologies and tools, and one of the technologies was Java. And I'm trying to make sure I understand, was that slide implying that Java had the ability to, from the outside, access the cloud, or it could participate within the cloud?
Participate.
Yeah, so we have a Java SDK as part of the .NET Services SDK. And we have a whole team of people. Are they here?
BJ?
BJ? He was here.
So one of the realizations that we made kind of early, I remember very specifically visiting a set of customers, and it was eye-opening to go and see that, yeah, they use .NET, and they understand C# and VB, and they love it, but they also use Java, and they also use PHP, and as much as Microsoft would like to think it's all .NET, it's not actually the case. So as part of the SDK, one of the things that we actually have is a Java sample where it is effectively equal the C# sample. So it participates as a peer. I think viably, if you're going to build a cloud platform, you need to have support from multiple languages and technologies.
Now, Clemens, you're going to actually be showing some of the Java code in your talk. So if you go to the Service Bus talk, Clemens is just nodding. He'll be showing how Java and other platforms can easily participate in this environment.
Is that a feature that you think is valuable to you, or?
I just happen to come from a company that's got a big investment in Java. So.
Oh, there you go.
Yep.
Great.
Thank you.
Is workflow service based on the latest version of WebF?
Yes. It's based on actually version 3.0. 3.0, sorry. I just think of that as my baby, so yeah, to me it's the latest.
And then
3.5.
And then we plan to be updating the internal build that we're on very shortly.
Yep.
So
3.5.
We're iterating to the 3.5.1.
So after the PDC, when we will have access to the new version, the workflow service will also be upgraded for that version?
Yes, I think maybe what you're asking is how do I think about compatibility as we move the APIs forward? Is that right?
That's right. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a great question. That's something that we think about every time we change any API. We are very, very kind of directed and intentional about if we do change things as we move both the framework that's on premises and that pervasively carrying out into the cloud as well.
Yeah. So during Mustafa's talk, Mustafa, raise your hand. He'll be describing kind of where we are and what the plans are moving forward. So remember, this is a CTP. This is an early glimpse. We don't have all the capabilities that we anticipate having when we're final.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, sorry. Round robin scheme says that we go here now.
Yep.
Hi, I have two questions. The first one is regarding to the development experience. Once you are commercialized the Azure platform, will it be kind of like Express Edition account-like things that developer can, play around with the technologies? And second, how you're approaching the service lifecycle story? I mean, service versioning, turning services on and off, and that kind of things.
Great questions. It's certainly our expectation. We haven't announced any pricing or anything like that at this stage. But it's certainly our expectation that there's going to be various pricing plans, one of which will be the ability for developers to have a lot of resources available to them to test and develop, just like we do today with our on-premise software. So there's the MSDN universal packages and other kinds of things that developers can sign up to, and they get the ability to use our platform and develop. And then as they go into production, there's different kinds of versions that'll have different kinds of SLAs and different kinds of performance and scale characteristics that we anticipate being available. So again, we're not ready to announce any of that. Your second question was around how do we think about versioning in this world? And it's actually pretty interesting. Let's take the workflow service that we were just looking at. It's possible for you to go create multiple different solutions out in the cloud and have those things run side by side. And so a common pattern that we see developers moving toward is they'll have a pre-production solution and then they'll have another solution, which is their production solution. Those can be on different pricing plans. They can have different access control rules about who's allowed to touch things and modify them. And in fact, we anticipate a world where lots of developers will all have their own projects. So they can get a copy of those things, work on them, develop, and then they might integrate them into a team project, and then from the team project to a beta project, from a beta project to a production. So we anticipate supporting many, many different kinds of versioning scenarios with this side-by-side capability that we provide. Now, as we move the services themselves forward, we anticipate being able to support backward versions, again, side-by-side because of that underlying capability of the Windows Azure layer, which allows this side-by-side operation. Does that help?
Does that mean for my own developed cloud services that I'm pushing into the Azure platform, I will have, a mechanic like a service registry or repository that I can, give to my customers and say, you can consume my service version A and B from here up and...
Sure. Well, in fact, one of the great capabilities of the service bus is exactly that. It is a service registry. It gives you the ability to create and control namespaces. And you can place different versions of your software under different names and get access to them through that service bus.
Yep.
So,
Clemens will talk about that as well. I'm glad to see that we're...
Clemens there's going to be a lot of demand.
Okay. Yeah, we're giving his talk.
All right.
Yeah. For large enterprise customers, will any of the Azure stack be available for them to install across their data centers?
We talked about that one a little bit earlier. It's our expectation that these technologies will over time move into our server products and be available.
Okay.
It's not, we're not making a blanket statement that every technology that makes sense hosted in the cloud is going to make sense on premise, and not every premise feature makes sense in the cloud. But we're certainly in this very interesting feedback cycle among our own products. As we look at, for example, what we're doing with the data services, those same APIs that we're providing as cloud capabilities are available in on-premise versions of SQL Server. Okay. And so you'll be able to develop the same app, same consistent set of APIs, the same set of capabilities, both on-premise and hosted in the cloud. So it's a pretty exciting time to be building these next generation style, high scalability, high availability apps.
Yeah, I had one other quick one, and that is, in the demos, I've seen a lot of people editing config files. Is there going to be something the equivalent of Greg Leake's configuration service 2.0?
Well, so some of the config that you see is just because we're in CTP. Mm-hmm. We expect that the Visual Studio tooling for a lot of this stuff will become much more property-based. I mean, you've already seen some of the early examples of that. When we did the workflow, there was no config, there was no anything. All Dennis did was he right mouse button clicked on the workflow in the designer, and he said deploy and run. So that's an example of where we're a little bit further ahead. Excel's another great example of where we've got great tools for looking at and manipulating the data without having to reach down into config. So we're early. This is a pretty early glimpse. You should expect our tooling to get a lot better over time. It's one of the areas where I think we've got some strengths.
Okay, thanks.
Round robining? Yep.
Yeah, I have a question about native code, non-managed, if that's supported in the cloud, and if that non-managed code is connecting to a database, running regular queries, connection strings, stuff like that. Is that supported in the cloud?
So today, in the CTP, none of what you've just asked for is supported. We expect more and more of that to come online over the intervening months.
Thank you.
Okay.
So I have a question on the service, the components that the end users are working on. Can they be anytime part of the cloud services, or can they like register or subscribe and become one of the components or one of the services in the list of the cloud services, or does it make sense at all?
It's a great question, and we use this very loosely coupled web services oriented architecture. It doesn't matter whether those services are hosted at Rackspace, whether the app consuming the services is at Rackspace or on your local premise or hosted in the Windows Azure cloud. All of those different applications will be able to use the access control service, the service bus. They'll be able to sync events in any of those locations. So it's a very fluid, new kind of model for putting together an application. In fact, one of the things that I think is so exciting about this new world is the ability for developers and for companies to make a decision after they've developed about whether or not they want these things running in-house, or maybe they want to move them up to the cloud, or maybe they even want a hybrid, where, for example, for flash load, I might put some of the stuff up into the Azure cloud and run the vast majority of my applications locally, or even vice versa.
Okay. And the other part is like, what about bugs and the way that
Bugs. We don't do bugs. No.
I know, but maybe just the users who are trying to use the services, there's a user error or something. So how would Microsoft or anybody who's supporting the services, to what extent they can and help these users?
Well, so a couple of things. In terms of the development environment where you're starting to debug, let's take the Windows Azure environment. You can use all the local debug tools and everything on your local machine, get the app up and running. Now, once it's running up in the cloud, I think we even demonstrated this. I didn't see that part, but I think we showed remote debugging of the processes as they're out in the cloud. So that's one way that will support you. But as you look at these fabrics and you start thinking about something like the distributed workflow, it's a new world. It's not like the workflow runs on that machine over there. It's actually spread across, it's kind of smeared across this large collection of computers. And so when you move into that world, it becomes a little more difficult to think about using traditional node-oriented debugging techniques to look at that. So we do things like provide log information, we provide detailed traces of what comes back, and so you can look to see what the problem was, and you have to start thinking about employing different techniques or different kinds of isolation as you go build the app. I think we're at the beginning of a pretty interesting new time in computing where we start doing these fabric-oriented operations, and there'll be new techniques that are invented to debug and think about them.
We got to wrap it up.
Thank you.
Okay.
I think
we're happy to answer more questions.
We just got to get off the stage.
But we got to let other people come in. So Dennis and I, how about we meet back over by those doors, and we're happy to just keep answering questions.
Sure, great. Okay. Thank you very much.